There's an irrigation system that uses no pumps, no filters, no electricity, no sprinkler heads, no drip emitters, no controllers, no timers, no apps, no sensors, no moving parts of any kind. It delivers water directly to plant roots with zero evaporation loss. It self-regulates based on soil moisture. It requires no maintenance for 50 years. It uses 70% less water than drip irrigation, 90% less than sprinklers. And it was invented 4,000 years ago. Every civilization that faced water scarcity used this system. The Chinese, the Persians, the Romans, the Arabs. It fed empires in deserts that should have been uninhabitable. Then it vanished from agricultural education, erased from textbooks, excluded from university courses, hidden from farmers facing the worst water crisis in human history. One buried pipe, 10 acres, 50 years. This is what the $15 billion irrigation industry doesn't want you to know. If this matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. The file is open. In 2011, a hydrologist named Dr. Arun Kumar Singh was sent to document a disaster. The Thar Desert in northwestern India was experiencing its worst drought in recorded history. Rainfall had dropped below 4 inches for 3 consecutive years. Wells that had sustained villages for generations were running dry. Farmers were abandoning land their families had worked for centuries. Livestock were dying. The Indian government needed documentation of the crisis to justify emergency relief funding. Dr. Singh expected to photograph death, brown fields, empty wells, the slow-motion collapse of agriculture in one of the harshest environments on Earth. He found something else entirely. In the Jodhpur district, surrounded by farms that had turned to dust, one property was green, not partially green, completely green. Vegetables, fruit trees, and grain crops growing in soil that had not seen significant rain in 3 years. Dr. Singh stopped his vehicle and stared. There were no sprinklers, no drip lines, no pump house, no solar panels, no visible irrigation infrastructure of any kind. He approached the farmer, an elderly man named Bhagwan Das, who was harvesting tomatoes as if drought were something that happened to other people. "How is this possible?" Dr. Singh asked. "Where is your water coming from?" Bhagwan Das did not answer immediately. He finished placing tomatoes in his basket, straightened his back, and smiled at the scientist who had come to document his neighbor's failures. "The water is underneath," he said. "It has been underneath since before I was born." He led Dr. Singh to the edge of the field and began to dig. 18 inches down, his shovel struck something solid. Clay, unglazed terracotta pipe, running in parallel lines beneath the entire farm. Bhagwan Das explained that his grandfather had buried these pipes in 1952, 60 years ago. The pipes were porous. Water placed in them seeped slowly through the clay walls into the surrounding soil directly to plant roots. He filled the pipes twice a week from a small well. The well had not run dry because the system used so little water. While his neighbor's pumps had sucked aquifers empty, his gentle seepage had preserved the water table beneath his land. Dr. Singh was a trained hydrologist. He had studied water systems for 20 years. He had never heard of this technology. He returned to his university and searched the scientific literature. What he found astonished him. The technology had names in a dozen languages: pitcher irrigation, clay pot irrigation, subsurface clay vessel irrigation. The Spanish called it Olla irrigation, from the word for pot. It had been studied extensively, documented repeatedly, proven effective in peer-reviewed research spanning decades, and it had been systematically excluded from every irrigation manual, every agricultural curriculum, every extension service recommendation he had ever encountered. Dr. Singh had earned his doctorate studying modern irrigation. He had taken courses on sprinkler systems, drip irrigation, center pivot technology, and computerized water management. No professor had ever mentioned buried clay pipes. He began to investigate why. The technology is older than writing. Archaeologists working in China's Gansu province discovered buried clay vessels in agricultural contexts dating to 2000 BCE. The vessels were not storage containers. They were arranged in patterns that could only be irrigation systems. 4,000 years ago, Chinese farmers had solved the problem of water scarcity using technology that modern agriculture ignores. The principle is elegant in its simplicity. Unglazed clay is porous. It contains microscopic channels that allow water molecules to pass through slowly. When you fill a clay vessel with water and bury it in soil, the water seeps outward through the clay walls. But here is what makes the system remarkable. The rate of seepage depends on the moisture content of the surrounding soil. When the soil is dry, water moves quickly through the clay. When the soil is moist, the flow slows. When the soil is saturated, the flow stops entirely. The system is self-regulating. It delivers water only when plants need it. It stops when they don't. No sensors required, no controllers, no human intervention. The physics are passive. Water moves from high concentration to low concentration. The moisture gradient between the inside of the vessel and the surrounding soil drives the flow. No energy input is needed. And because the water is delivered below ground level, there is zero evaporation loss. Surface irrigation loses 30 to 50% of water to evaporation before it ever reaches plant roots. Sprinkler systems lose even more, with water evaporating in midair before it even hits the ground. Buried clay vessels lose nothing. Every molecule of water reaches the soil. The Chinese did not keep this technology to themselves. By 1000 BCE, Persian farmers had adopted and refined the method. The Persian Empire stretched across some of the driest territory on earth. From modern Iran through Iraq and into Central Asia, Persian agriculture flourished in deserts that should have been uninhabitable. They called it pitcher irrigation. They developed specialized vessels optimized for different crops. They created burial patterns and spacing guidelines refined over centuries of practice. The knowledge was recorded in agricultural texts that Persian scholars preserved and expanded for 1,000 years. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia in 330 BCE, Greek scholars documented the irrigation methods they encountered. The technology spread westward into the Mediterranean world. The Romans encountered it when they expanded into the Middle East. Columella, writing his agricultural manual De Re Rustica in 65 CE, described burying clay vessels near fruit trees to provide steady moisture through dry summers. Roman farmers adopted the practice throughout their empire. From North Africa to Spain to the southern reaches of Gaul, buried clay pots irrigated crops in regions too dry for rain-fed agriculture. When Rome fell, Arab scholars preserved the knowledge. They carried it across North Africa, through Spain, and eventually to the New World. Spanish missionaries established pitcher irrigation in the deserts of Mexico and the American Southwest. By 1500 CE, this technology was practiced on 4 continents. It had fed billions of people across dozens of civilizations. It was standard agricultural knowledge in every water-scarce region on Earth. Then, the Industrial Revolution arrived, and the technology began to disappear. The disappearance was not deliberate, not at first. Steam engines could pump water from deep aquifers. Iron pipes could carry it across distances that clay vessels could never span. Industrial agriculture demanded industrial solutions. Buried clay pots could not irrigate 1,000-acre wheat fields. They could not be installed by machines. They required hand labor that industrializing economies were abandoning. The technology was not disproven. It was simply deemed irrelevant to modern agriculture. By 1900, agricultural textbooks in Europe and America made no mention of clay pot irrigation. A method that had sustained civilizations for 4 millennia was treated as if it had never existed. But then something happened that should have changed everything. In 1913, a German engineer named Richard Teltschik filed a patent that would be ignored for a century. Teltschik had studied ancient irrigation methods and recognized their potential for modern agriculture. He developed a system of porous pipes that could be manufactured industrially and buried in fields to provide continuous subsurface irrigation. His patent described everything: the porous material, the burial depth, the spacing patterns, the connection to water sources, a complete system ready for commercial production. He demonstrated it to agricultural authorities. The efficiency was undeniable. Water savings of 60 to 80% compared to surface irrigation. Crop yields equal to or exceeding conventional methods. Teltschik sought investment to manufacture his pipes at scale. He approached irrigation equipment companies. They were not interested. The irrigation industry in 1913 was focused on big projects, dams and canals and pumping stations, infrastructure that required massive capital investment and generated massive ongoing revenue. Buried porous pipes required minimal capital investment. A farmer could install them once and never purchase irrigation equipment again. This was not a business opportunity. This was a threat. Teltschik's patents expired. His research gathered dust. The technology that could have transformed 20th century agriculture was buried as thoroughly as the pipes themselves. The pattern repeated throughout the century. In 1958, researchers at the University of Arizona conducted the first modern scientific trials of buried clay pot irrigation. They compared water use and crop yields between pitcher irrigation and conventional surface methods. The results were striking. Water savings of 50 to 70%, crop yields equal to surface irrigation with a fraction of the water. The researchers recommended immediate adoption in water-scarce regions of the American Southwest. The recommendation disappeared into filing cabinets. No follow-up research was funded. No extension programs promoted the findings. Arizona farmers continued pumping aquifers dry while the solution sat in an unread academic journal. In 1974, Iranian researchers published a comprehensive study of traditional pitcher irrigation systems still operating in rural Persia. They documented farms that had used the same buried clay vessels for over 200 years with no maintenance and no decline in performance. 200 years. The same vessels, still working. The research was published in Farsi. It was not translated into English. It remained unknown to Western agricultural science. In 1987, the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics documented buried pitcher irrigation in sub-Saharan Africa. They compared traditional farmers using clay pots to neighboring farms using modern drip irrigation. The traditional method used less water and achieved higher yields than the modern technology. This finding was explosive. It suggested that the expensive irrigation systems being promoted across the developing world were inferior to technology that cost almost nothing. The research was not publicized. Development agencies continued promoting drip irrigation. African farmers continued being told that their traditional methods were primitive. In 2006, researchers in Brazil documented traditional clay pot irrigation in the semi-arid Northeast. They found water efficiency exceeding 90%, far beyond any modern system. In 2014, Pakistani researchers confirmed that buried pitcher irrigation outperformed drip systems in water efficiency, crop yield, and cost effectiveness. In 2019, researchers in Ethiopia demonstrated that clay pot irrigation could make agriculture viable in regions previously considered too dry for farming. The studies pile up, decade after decade, country after country. The evidence is overwhelming and consistent. Buried clay irrigation works. It works better than modern alternatives. It has worked for 4,000 years. And decade after decade, the evidence is ignored. The question is no longer whether the technology works. The question is why it remains hidden. The answer is $15 billion. The global irrigation equipment industry generates approximately $15 billion in annual revenue. Sprinkler systems, drip irrigation, pumps, filters, controllers, sensors, pipes, fittings, installation services, maintenance contracts. The industry depends on complexity. It depends on moving parts that break. It depends on technology that requires replacement. A modern drip irrigation system has a functional lifespan of 10 to 15 years. Emitters clog, UV degrades plastic tubing, pumps wear out, filters need replacement, controllers malfunction. Every component that fails is a sale. Every system that wears out is a new installation. Every farmer who irrigates is a customer for life. Buried clay vessels do not wear out. They do not clog because they have no emitters. They do not degrade because fired clay is chemically stable. They do not malfunction because they have no electronics. A buried clay system installed in 1952 was still working in 2011, 60 years later, when Dr. Singh discovered Bhagwan Das and his impossible green farm. 60 years, zero maintenance, zero replacement parts, zero ongoing revenue. From the perspective of a company that sells irrigation equipment, this is a catastrophe. The industry has not conspired to suppress clay pot irrigation in the sense of secret meetings and explicit plans. The suppression is structural. Research funding flows toward technologies that generate commercial opportunities. Seed companies fund seed research. Fertilizer companies fund fertility research. Irrigation companies fund irrigation research. Nobody funds research on technologies that eliminate the need for their products. University programs are shaped by industry partnerships. Extension services are influenced by equipment manufacturers. The curriculum is written by people whose careers depend on the current system. A professor who teaches buried clay irrigation threatens relationships with industry sponsors. An extension agent who promotes it risks funding from equipment dealers. The technology is not suppressed through malice. It is suppressed through incentives. Everyone who might teach it has reasons not to. Everyone who might promote it has pressures against it. Everyone who might fund research on it would rather fund research on something they can sell. The information exists. The studies are published. But the infrastructure that would translate research into practice is controlled by industries that profit from ignorance. Meanwhile, the world is running out of water. Agriculture consumes 70% of global freshwater withdrawals. In arid regions, the figure exceeds 90%. The Ogallala Aquifer, the underground reservoir that irrigates the American Great Plains, has dropped by over 150 feet in some areas. It took millions of years to fill. It will be effectively exhausted within the lifetimes of farmers currently working above it. The Colorado River no longer reaches the sea. Its water is fully allocated to irrigation and urban use long before it completes its natural course. 7 states and Mexico depend on a river that no longer has enough water to meet their legal claims. Groundwater in India, where Dr. Singh discovered Bhagwan Das, is disappearing at rates that will leave hundreds of millions without irrigation within decades. The pumps that drain the aquifers are falling silent as the water table drops below their reach. The response of governments and development agencies is to promote more efficient modern irrigation. Drip systems that waste only 30% of water instead of 50%. Sensors that optimize waste. Apps that monitor inefficiency. The response is not to adopt technology that wastes nothing. Because there is no profit in technology that wastes nothing, you can build the system yourself. The simplest version uses traditional clay pots called Ollas. Any unglazed terracotta vessel will work. The pot must be porous, not sealed or glazed. Bury the pot in your garden with only the neck exposed. Fill it with water. The water will seep through the clay walls over several days, irrigating a radius of approximately 18 inches around the pot. For a home garden, a dozen Ollas provide complete irrigation coverage for most vegetable beds. Fill them every 3 to 5 days depending on heat and plant needs. The cost is minimal. Terracotta pots are inexpensive and available everywhere. The labor is one afternoon of digging. The result is irrigation that continues working for decades. For larger areas, buried porous pipe is more practical. Traditional terracotta pipe works well but can be fragile. Modern alternatives include porous ceramic pipe, porous concrete pipe, and specialized porous plastic pipe designed for subsurface irrigation. The pipes are buried 12 to 18 inches deep in parallel lines, spaced according to soil type. Sandy soil requires closer spacing because water moves quickly through it. Clay soil allows wider spacing because water spreads more broadly. One end of each pipe run connects to a water source. This can be a simple gravity-fed tank elevated a few feet above the field. No pump is required if the tank is higher than the pipes. Water enters the pipes and seeps through the porous walls along their entire length. The seepage rate is self-regulating based on soil moisture. When soil is dry, water flows faster. When soil is moist, it slows. When soil is saturated, it stops. Fill the supply tank once or twice per week, depending on conditions. The buried pipes distribute water continuously between fillings. The initial installation requires labor. Trenches must be dug, pipes must be laid and connected. Soil must be replaced and settled, but this labor occurs once. Bhagwan Das did not install his irrigation system. His grandfather installed it. 3 generations have farmed that land using pipes buried before Bhagwan Das was born. When he dies, his children will continue farming. When they die, his grandchildren will continue. The same pipes, the same system, still seeping water to plant roots a century after installation. This is the time horizon that modern agriculture cannot comprehend. This is the efficiency that the irrigation industry cannot allow you to know. Dr. Singh returned from the Thar Desert and wrote his report. He documented Bhagwan Das and his buried pipes. He calculated the water efficiency. He compared the costs and performance to modern irrigation systems. His conclusion was unambiguous. Buried clay irrigation was superior to any technology currently being promoted in water-scarce regions. He submitted the report to his university. He sought funding for further research. He proposed pilot programs to introduce the technology to farmers facing water crises. The funding was not approved. The pilot programs were not established. His report was filed alongside decades of similar reports that had reached similar conclusions. The irrigation industry continued selling sprinklers and drip systems. Development agencies continued promoting modern technology. Farmers continued pumping aquifers dry. And Bhagwan Das continued harvesting tomatoes from fields that had been green for 60 years. The water crisis will force a reckoning. When the aquifers are empty, pumps become worthless. When the rivers are dry, canals carry nothing. When the infrastructure that modern agriculture depends on fails, farmers will face a choice. They can abandon their land. They can watch their crops die. They can join the hundreds of millions of climate refugees that this century will produce. Or they can remember what Bhagwan Das never forgot. The water is underneath. It has been underneath for 4,000 years, seeping slowly through clay walls, reaching plant roots directly, wasting nothing. 1 buried pipe, 10 acres, 50 years. This is not primitive technology. This is elegant engineering that modern industry cannot improve because it cannot sell improvements. This is not ancient history. This is the future that becomes necessary when the present runs out of water. The pipes are waiting, the knowledge is available. The only thing missing is the decision to use it. Bhagwan Das did not need scientists to tell him his system worked. The proof was growing in his fields, while his neighbors' fields turned to dust. You do not need permission from the irrigation industry. You do not need approval from extension services. You do not need expensive equipment or complex technology. You need a shovel, some porous pipe, and the willingness to bury what the irrigation industry has spent a century burying. The water is underneath. It always has been. If this video helped you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every share exposes what they buried. The next video opens soon.